Thank you all for being here today. This is a really exciting opportunity for me. For those of you, I see several people out here that I know. This is a real treat because I genuinely love talking to people and getting to know people and their stories. And today is really intended to be an opportunity for us to talk about something that I have personally lived through a couple of different times. And I am hoping that if you're here, you may be at a point where you are kind of seeking. And that is really what this is. It's an opportunity for us to engage in some conversation about what it means to potentially be pursuing a career change. So a couple thoughts. Agenda, I'm going to talk a little bit about my own journey as kind of an introduction to the topic. We'll talk about the importance of knowing yourself. If anybody was in several of the sessions this morning, but one of the sessions that I was in, there was a really good introduction to what it means to kind of find your personal path, your values. So I felt like that was a really good introduction to this topic. Part of what we want to talk about today is like what's getting in your way. So if you're sitting there and you've heard that small voice about the potential for career change, there's possibly something that is giving you pause. And we want to talk a little bit about that and kind of normalize the conversation around, whatever those factors are that may be a barrier. And then important is kind of taking that and then switching gears and taking action. And then at the end, we'll talk about, for those of you who may be facing an upcoming career change, what those first 90 days might look like and how you might want to strategize and think about that as you're transitioning into a new position or a new organization. So just a little bit of background about myself, because I do think that this is a key part of who I am and how I think about work and people in my life. So first, I grew up in New Mexico. I am not local. I have lived here for 30 years, so I consider myself to be somewhat local. But, if you live in Tunkhannock, if you weren't born and raised there, you can't claim it truly, right? I'm sure many of you are from small towns like that. So I moved to New York for college, and then I moved to Pennsylvania after I graduated from college 30 years ago. So it'll be 30 years this summer, and I love this area and this community. What brought me to the area was my background in engineering. So it was super exciting to hear the speaker at lunch today, Patrice, because I could really relate to some of her experiences as an engineer. So I moved to the area to work for P&G, started as a process engineer, and really throughout my time with Procter & Gamble, which was really like the first half of my career professionally, it was really a series of roles in operations. But I made the decision when I was expecting our third child to leave P&G to stay home full time. So that was the first career pivot, okay? So for anybody out there who has either been a stay-at-home mom, who has, anybody who's been a parent, been a stay-at-home mom, it is a different environment, especially after you have been in a corporate setting for 15 years and, you could work collaboratively with people and, come to consensus decisions. Children don't do that. So, that was kind of the first pivot. And then after being home with my kids for 5 years, made the decision that I wanted to return to doing work that was related to my professional experience, and had the opportunity to work for DHL. So now I moved from like a manufacturing environment into logistics and warehousing, which was super interesting work. I loved learning about the technologies. We were working with Procter & Gamble, so it was adjacent to the work that I had been doing previously and allowed me a good on-ramp back into work that was really interesting and exciting. But I started to hear that small voice, and what I felt compelled to do was move more in the direction of working at a community level. And at that time, I was fortunate enough to have an opportunity to join the Tunkhannock Area School District as the Chief Operating Officer. It was incredibly impactful, and I'm kind of looking at Holly. Holly's on our school board. It was a period of time that, number one, we were consolidating schools. that was very interesting. And then guess what? We had COVID. So it was a very interesting time to be a part of public education, and my growth curve was exponential, but that career pivot was a really important step for me. But again, I was still hearing that voice, had not quite satisfied that itch to be able to do work that was community-led, community-driven, and in service of community. And I had the opportunity to transition to work for NeighborWorks Northeastern Pennsylvania, which is a nonprofit located in Scranton. We do community development work with a real focus on affordable housing. And so it really allowed me to kind of complete, I'll say complete, but that you'll see is not really the end point of my journey, but it allowed me to kind of get to a place that better satisfied where I wanted to be in the community. I am married. I have 3 kids. My kids are 24, 18, and 14, so I have experienced everything from babies, teenagers, to now having an adult who has his own insurance. So that was a milestone for me. Any of you who have grown kids, I was like, oh, just get health insurance. That seemed like a major milestone, and be able to pay his rent. And he can do that. So, cheers to Logan, because he is now gainfully employed in Tennessee, and that's all a good thing. I enjoy reading, exploring, wellness, music, and I put the and ... because for me personally, I could never just list the things that I find interesting and that I have passion for, because I just find life to be just this gift of just opportunity to learn and explore. And that really also does, I think, mirror how I've approached my career, because there are so many wonderful things that people can engage in different ways. What I want to also just preface is that going forward for the remainder of this, I don't have any magic bullets. I haven't written any books, although I aspire to maybe make that a change or a future goal. You may get to the end of this 45 minutes and you might say to yourself, I kind of knew that. The piece that's important is that sometimes we just need to hit the pause and put all those pieces together. And my goal, my hope for the people that are in this room with us today is that at the end of those 45 minutes, you for yourself have been able to at least have a gem that you mined from this conversation that you're like, oh, okay, it inspires you to go do something that's been on your backlog. It inspires you to go do something that was on that someday maybe list. It inspires you to have a conversation that you didn't think about before being here today. So to me, it's less about the content, and it's more about having space to be able to think about those things holistically and to be surrounded by people who are like-minded, that are also seeking and are kind of on that personal journey of discovery, and we form a community of support, knowing that there are other people who are looking for similar answers. All right, so we plow forward. So I had, sorry about that. Oh, there we go. So I had named this Redefining Normal, because I think normal is a real fallacy. I think that there really isn't truly a definition of normal. So the definition of normal talks about conforming, it talks about a standard, it talks about what's typical or expected. And in the context of career, I started to think about what is normal, right? So is it, do you work at the same company for your whole career? There was at one point in history, that was the definition of a normal career. You were a lifer, you joined an organization, and there was pride in being able to stay with that organization for the entirety of your career. And that model is still valid and works. My husband has worked for the same organization for 30 plus years, and that has been a really good fit for him and his skill set. Is it working in the same sector, having the same employer? I mean, again, normal has been defined by society in a variety of different ways. What did my parents do? What are my friends doing? I think, those factors become influential in, our personal definitions of what normal means, because those are the factors that guide and drive who we are and what our value system has been created to be at the point where we are at in our careers. But what I would throw out there for consideration is that there really is not a definition of normal when it comes to career. It is very much a process, and it is a journey. And I think this next slide is like so apropos. Like, I think in society, we very much still believe the top, that it is linear. We are a linear thinking society in general, right? So, we think that we start at point A and we end at point B, and we put together our plans, and like everybody tells us, like put together those steps and you'll get from A to B. But in my personal experience, it's really that bottom picture. It is all the things in life that come up. So some of it is just life happening. Some of it is new insight. Things that you thought were your end goal no longer are the important factors for you anymore. And so you are kind of experiencing that real time, and it is not a linear path. So let's talk a little bit about kind of what needs to happen in the beginning as you are thinking about the process of changing careers. First and foremost, I think it is absolutely essential to spend some time knowing who you are as an individual. It is, do I want or need to make a change? There are a lot of different ways to approach challenges in our careers professionally. Change is just one of them. And it's important to kind of take a step back and really understand what is an important motivator for you, where your passions are. And several of the sessions today did a really good job of encouraging us, giving us tools to really think about these first couple bullet points. So I would encourage everyone to take a couple of minutes, whether that's today or when you get back home tonight, to write down one or two things that come to mind that are true motivators for you, that are essential to you in defining career success. What are my passions? What are my values? Taking that time to do the self-reflection is really important. I also, through my own personal experience, have learned that we all go through seasons in our lives. And the season of life is very much intertwined with our professional happiness and, satisfaction. And so I have found that changing jobs does not always change all the other stuff. I'll give you a great example. So when I was working for P&G, I was terrible at signing permission slips. So I'd think I'd get to it. I'd set it on the counter. I don't know. I would procrastinate. Same with laundry. I'll put it away. So when I chose to stay home with my kids, in my head, I was like, oh, these things are all gonna magically improve now that I'm full-time at home. No, I was bad at them before, I was bad at them after. I mean, the reality is those things were not determined by my job in the moment. And so it is an important piece in this self-discovery to be able to kind of take a step back and say, okay, is this life? Or is it the job? And can those two things coexist? And making sure that you are not leaving a job that has longer term benefits for a short term need. Next one, am I in a toxic environment? This is really important, and I don't want to gloss over this and not give this a fair shake, because I would never encourage someone to stay in a toxic environment. I think it is incredibly important to really make sure that you have good supports if you're in an environment where there is verbal abuse, potentially sexual harassment, anything of a physical nature. I think if you're in an environment where people on a regular basis are not supportive and encouraging of you and the work that you do, it is important to ensure that you have strategies to be able to give yourself the right support, and make sure that you have someone that you can talk with. If it's not internally, it's somebody externally, so that you can find the skills that you need to be able to either address the situation internally or be able to look for alternative solutions. This last one is an important piece because this is one that I think a lot of us struggle with, and this is this concept of quitting, right? So I think in general, we are taught to stick it out. We are a society that rewards, pulling up by your bootstraps and like rugged individualism and you can, fake it till you make it and, all of those kinds of things. And I think we are afraid that we'll be labeled as a quitter. And somewhere along the way, I think I was watching a movie, there was a quote about comparing the difference between quitting and quitting while you're ahead. And I think it's an important distinction, and for some people might be a freeing way to think about it. You need to be able to be aware, self-aware, to the point where you recognize when there is no longer any added benefit to you or an organization by staying. And some of the best coaches that you will ever have are people who can help you see that it's okay to leave. And that's an important thing, especially if you're a supervisor or a manager. I would encourage you to assess that for yourself, because sometimes, we think that the success is keeping that person in that role for whatever reason. Either we don't have a backfill, we think we can fix it, but when you realize that there isn't a good fit for an individual, it's okay to have honest conversations with somebody to be able to help them understand that there may be a better fit for them in another line of work. Or if they're coming to you expressing that there might be a better place for them, it's okay to engage in that conversation. Like, you're not gonna run somebody out the door by having a good quality connection and have that conversation. Any Peloton fanatics in the room? Oh, I see a couple. Okay, so one of my favorite Peloton instructors is Jess Sims. She is amazing, and she just really inspires me, like when I'm on the treadmill and she can have something like exciting and positive to say. And one of her quotes is that you are a masterpiece and a work in progress at the same damn time. And I love that model of that we can continue to strive, whether that's professionally or personally, but at the same time, be very comfortable and satisfied with who we are as individuals. So you'll see a few other of those quotes in through here. All right, so we've done some of the self-assessment. Let's assume for the moment that you choose that you want to move forward and you are interested in pursuing an alternative career. So what's getting in the way? Let's kind of have some honest conversation about that. So if you don't already have a piece of paper out, I want everybody to at least have something to write with. If you want to put it in your phone as a note, if you have a piece of paper and a pen. We're going to do, as we go through a couple of these slides, I'm going to ask you to jot down some thoughts. And I don't want you to think too hard about it, because usually that first thought that comes into your head is the, truth that you are trying to speak. So I want to just touch on a few things that are often barriers for people when you're thinking about doing a career transition. One, there is fear. There is fear of finances. There is fear of starting over. There is fear of what the impact is to the progression of your career. There is fear about support. If one of those items is something for you personally that right now kind of stands out to you, jot down that word. If it's not, we'll go on to some other ones. But if it is for you, just pick that word that really screamed at you. The next bucket, lack of knowledge. Where do I start? I will be honest with you. When I started, after I had been at P&G for 15 years, and then I was home with my kids for 5, things had really transitioned. And everything had gone to a digital world. And my network was kind of shot, frankly, at that point. And so I didn't know how to kind of re-engage. I'm not gonna lie to you, there is definitely an online world right now. I think we all know that. Many jobs are open and available online. The position that I joined NeighborWorks on, I first saw it on Indeed. That is how I learned about that position, was through kind of some just very common job search. But I think that it is your network that will help open doors. So I think it is a twofer. And so I think having an opportunity to think a little bit about who you know in that process is an important step. interviewing, developing your resume, those are skills that you are going to obviously want to hone a little bit. And the resume, to me, it shouldn't be a daunting process, because what you do is you think about all the things that you're doing right now and how you would capture that in a way that is compelling. And you want to be able to paint that into a picture of less about like, hey, I've only worked in manufacturing, so like how in the world would I work in nonprofit operations? The common theme is operations. The common skills are being able to work with people, being able to develop a budget, being able to create a strategic plan. Those are the skills that really become those transferable pieces that you're going to want to build into your resume and feel comfortable talking about. A lot of people feel that that process of interviewing or developing the resume is intimidating because it feels like you're bragging. I mean, at the end of the day, you have to be able to put yourself out there if you want to make this kind of a pivot, and it's important to feel comfortable, being able to confidently speak to the things that you have accomplished. And the reality is any task, any job can be converted into a compelling story that really would be catching to somebody. Customer service, working with clients, ways in which you build connection with people. Those are skills that are really transferable across multiple sectors. So this last piece here in terms of fear is, what if change is not possible now? I recognize that not everyone can just leave a job, right? People are financially dependent on us. Like, the mortgage doesn't get paid if there aren't two gainfully employed adults in the house. So what are some other strategies that you can use to continue to feel professionally challenged, even in those situations? One, is a new role possible within your existing company, employer, structure, whatever the case might be? Two, you gotta sometimes have some difficult conversations. If you are unsatisfied in the work that you are currently doing, you need to be able to get to a point where you are able to have that conversation with somebody so that they have the knowledge to be able to partner with you in finding a better solution, ideally within the company, but potentially out externally. Because who knows, that person could be your biggest advocate and your greatest link to another opportunity just by having an honest conversation, whether that's an internal opportunity or something potentially external. And then the last one is seeking satisfaction outside of our 9 to 5. So depending on what school of thought you listen to, and there's a couple of books up here that I've heard some really good podcasts on this topic. I think sometimes we're told your work has to bring you this great joy and satisfaction, and if that's not your situation, then something's broken and you got to go figure out how to fix it. The reality is sometimes it just pays the bills, and that's okay. You need to be comfortable with that, but you can find some of that passion and that satisfaction outside of the 9 to 5. So what I would say is, if you're in a position where you're realistically not able to change jobs, it is also okay to start having conversations about, where do I get this? So if it's, hey, I want to be a leader, it's all right, so what other volunteer work can you do? Is there a board that you can join? Can you have coffee with somebody who can mentor you to help you learn about ways to build those skills? Are there opportunities like this, like Empower, where you can go and you can, engage with some people, build your network. Those sometimes are bridges that allow you to not just, it's not saying not ever, it's just saying maybe not yet. And so it doesn't necessarily mean that it's an end in the journey. It's like a pivot point for you to be able to look at a different path to be able to get where you're looking to go. So in the first one, I asked if any of those topics around fear resonated with anyone. Before I go off this slide, if you didn't write something down in the fear line, I would encourage you to pick one from some of those other buckets. Is it a lack of knowledge? Is it, hey, it's not going to work right now, and so again, I'm still feeling that voice, but I need to find something else right now to help me bridge. So take a pause, capture something if you haven't. All right. All right, so now we kind of turn the corner a little bit. So I've made the decision, so I know myself, I know what I'm looking for, I know I'm ready to kind of make a career change, and I've gotten past the fear, right? So now I'm at a point where do I start? So let's just talk about a couple pieces of this journey, the before and the after. So let's kind of talk about the before. I do believe that having a plan is the best course of action if you're looking to make a career pivot. I feel like there are certainly examples of where somebody like walks in, throws their badge down, and then like tomorrow they're like gainfully employed someplace else. But realistically, I think that happens mostly in the movies and on TV. I think for the majority of us, like you gotta have some plan. And I think a really big part of that is like having a good support network. And so, you know, this kind of ties in with this last one, who do you tell? Because I think that this can be kind of a sticky subject in some situations. But I think at a minimum, you need to know that you have a confidant somewhere, because you're gonna need moral support. You might need the alignment and support of a spouse. You might have a friend group or a network or somebody that can kind of help keep you engaged, motivated, and reinforce, in those periods of time where maybe it does get a little bit challenging or tricky. It's good to know that you have some resources in that process. I think the have a plan piece is particularly important and can be challenging when you have a significant other. I'm not gonna pull any punches, right? I mean, so if you're in a relationship where both finances are critical in your household, then it is an important conversation to have to kind of figure out how you're going to navigate that. And I think that can take on a lot of different forms, but I think it is an important piece in the transparency of kind of making it a success on the other end, is knowing that you have at least the support and allyship of somebody who is closest to you. We talked a little bit about building your resume. The nice thing about the internet is there's models for everything out there right now. So, if you don't currently have a resume, I would encourage you to just build one, even if you're really not thinking about doing a pivot right now, because I just think it's a good exercise. It's a good assessment tool to really be able to take that inventory of skills and figure out how you would communicate that to somebody. And I think it also can be a little bit of a motivator, right? To be able to kind of step back and say, wow, I really have done all this stuff, and it is not insignificant, the skills that you have built throughout the course of your career. Network. I think that this is a really important piece. There are a ton of ways to go about doing this, both formal and informal, but you have been given a gift today in the fact that you are here. And so here's one of your writing exercises. Think of one person you met today that you want to connect with after today. So it could be, hey, I'm going to send them a message on LinkedIn. Could be you got somebody's business card and you're going to send them an email. Could be that you kind of, reconnected with somebody that you haven't seen in a while and you're going to give them a call for coffee. Any of those are really relevant and valid ways to build your network, because you are one conversation away from finding that next opportunity. And that really is kind of partly at the core of my story, is while I first saw the position, as a posting, the reality is that, my personal friendship and relationship with Jesse Ergot was a really big piece in, knowing that this was the kind of place where I wanted to work. And so I think that you just never know. I mean, we were talking about this the other night. For those of you who might know Jesse, he's actually transitioning to a new position. And we were having a community event the other night in celebration of all that he has contributed to the region. And my initial relationship and friendship with him started as he was really a mentor to me. He was somebody that I had met like 7 years ago, and really I didn't join NeighborWorks until 2 years ago. So there was a journey there in, just really finding somebody who had kind of, was like-minded, who had shared thoughts, somebody that I could like bounce ideas off of, and at the time he encouraged me to like work at the school district, and so it's interesting how those relationships kind of, can come back at different points in your career and can be really valuable. Interview. So obviously, in order to get a new job, you're most likely going to have to interview. Most of us can't do that alone on our credentials on a piece of paper alone. So it is a good opportunity to practice. My sister just recently was applying for a position internally within her organization, and she had to go through an interview, and she hadn't done it in a really long time, and it was like one of those like panel interviews with like 6 people, and she had to do 2 different ones. She works for the government. And so it was just like, but we had a lot of conversations over the phone. Like we, kicked around possible questions and what would be your response. And like we did some dry runs. It's like that stuff that you might have done when you were in college and like the Career Development Center would offer opportunities. Like you just do it again, but maybe now you're doing it with a friend over coffee. Or maybe you're doing it with one of your teenage or college age kids. Like what an amazing way to practice and hone those skills while also like teaching them the importance of good communication. So think creatively about how you can practice that. And that this last one around who do you tell? I do think that this is an important piece in today's world, because I think when you are looking to make a career change, a pivot that's outside of your existing company, I do think that it's important to at least hit the pause and think about the implications of sharing broadly. So you obviously, you do not know what those outcomes will be. And it's important to maintain good, healthy relationships. And so it's just, I think an important crossroad to think about what the potential impacts are as you start to communicate your interests and your intent as you are looking for employment in other places. On the flip side, so let's say you've got the job. But you're still in it, right? There's this period of transition. Anybody who has changed careers knows that there's like a period of transition. I think that there are some really good things that we can do that send the right message, maintain healthy relationships, and set us up for success in our next position. One is doing a good job of wrapping up your projects. So whatever that is, whatever the work is that you're responsible for, I think as good corporate citizens, we tee up the next person for success. And so we take the time to document the things that you wish you had when you started that position, that you put a bow on something so that it's easy to communicate and transition to the next person who has responsibility for that. Communication is also an important factor. There is typically in an organization a natural order of things. Like if you're going to leave, like who do you tell? As a courtesy, telling your immediate supervisor is probably a good first step versus like, water cooler, you tell everybody else and like then your boss is finding it out third hand. Doesn't make for solid relationships. So I would just encourage you to not forget about that, because sometimes there's a lot of excitement, right? And that's good. You want to celebrate that you are kind of on to that next thing that's really big and important for you. But it's also important to recognize that your organization needs to go through a period of transition. In some cases, they're going to mourn your loss. In some cases, they're going to like be freaking out because they're not really sure how to cover that, and they're like trying to scramble. And so it's just important to recognize that there are other people that are part of that process. I talked a little bit about transitioning work to others. It's like that philosophy of like leave it better than you found it. That has sort of been something that's been important to me. And then I talked about this, maintaining healthy relationships. You never know when that person, the organization you're leaving and that boss that you've had is going to be that advocate for you in the future. I know people who have rejoined organizations. That's right. Don't spit in the water. You might have to drink it. I love that. That will be a new gem that I will take away from today. That's right. Before I leave this slide, I want everybody to pick like one thing that would be a good next step for you, depending on where you are in this process. Like if you're here just because you're curious, then that's okay. But if you really are considering a career move, to me, what can happen when we come to these types of events is our intentions are amazing and we're like, oh, I'm gonna like set the world on fire tomorrow when I get back to the office. And then like everything hits the fan and you're back at it. And then like, you know, we'll be a month from now and everybody will be like, oh, remember what I was gonna do. But if you take 2 seconds right now and write down something that you want to do coming out of here, you will be just that much closer to being able to commit to that and feeling like you have action. Okay. So let's talk briefly about the first 90 days. I noticed I didn't bring that book. There's actually a book called The First 90 Days, which is super helpful for individuals who are looking at starting a new position. And I think there's some really important things to consider both on the personal and the professional side. One, prepare yourself and others. This is more on the personal side. So I think that it's important to have conversations, again, with the people in your life to help them understand what that transition might look like. If I'm being honest and realistic, I know that in the first 90 days when I have started a new position, it is typically much more time intensive than ongoing, responsibilities, because there's so much relationship building that you're doing at the beginning, and that takes time. Good quality relationships take time. And so, I'm getting ready to make a transition within NeighborWorks, and I had a conversation with my kids about okay, I think on these days I'm going to be going in earlier. You're gonna make your own lunch that day. And you might be sitting there thinking why is your 14-year-old not making his own lunch? But I still make my 14-year-old's lunch. And so it's some of those conversations though, even just having a little bit of an expectations exchange up front can go a really long way. Talking about scheduling with my husband and saying look, I know in the next few weeks, I'm not gonna be able to get the kids to school or, go to a lacrosse game or whatever the case might be. Everybody's situation is different. So doesn't mean these are things that only have to be discussed if you have kids. It is, you may be single, but you have commitments that are just as important to you, and the people that are on the other side of those commitments, they don't know without having that conversation. And so I really think having this conversation to prepare yourself and others is important. And I would also say the piece around preparing yourself is to give yourself a lot of grace during a period of transition. You are learning a lot. You are learning about a new position. You're learning about potentially a whole new group of people, an organization. You're learning about yourself and your own leadership. And it's important that you recognize, number one, not to take on too much in those first 90 days, because you're gonna wanna set the world on fire because you're excited. You have a lot of energy. You wanna get right in there and you wanna do good things. And that makes sense. But it is also very easy in that period of time to overcommit. So I would just say be cautious of that and be aware that that may be your natural tendency, so that you at least are kind of hitting the brake from time to time to make sure that you realistically can complete the things that your mouth is committing you to. Listen. So, and this kind of goes in line with the 100 coffees in 100 days. So while it's not realistic to really go out for coffee 100 times in 100 days, it is kind of what I, in my mind, think about what those first 90 days are about. It is about connecting with people. Because when you're coming into a new position, regardless of what that position is, taking the time to really listen to how the work has been done. What do people want to keep? What do they want to get rid of? There is no better time than at a transition to really kind of take some extra moments of self-assessment or organizational assessment. And that's a lot about what the book, The First 90 Days, is about, is the different organizational systems to look at during those first 90 days to help you think about, as a leader, how you would want to move forward and what you might want to plan for. I love this quote at the end. I don't know if this guy said this. This is somebody I follow on Instagram. It is, move fast, break things, learn, implement, repeat. Yes, planning is useful, but you'll forever stay where you are unless you are willing to enter the arena and risk making a mistake. And I think when we are looking at a career change, it's super easy to get stuck because of the fear of maybe making a mistake. And I just really like this model. And somebody else talked about being in the arena. I think that's a Brené Brown. It's about that engagement piece. So just a few final thoughts before we wrap up. One, being willing to embrace change is at the heart of being open to a potential career change. So, the idea of that growth mindset, right? So the idea that change is not something to be feared, but something to really strive for as a way of continuing to grow as an individual is really about that mindset of wanting to explore and try new things. Creating a vision and establishing goals is an important part, but really being willing to accept change when it presents itself. Sometimes we have the best plans, but an opportunity comes to us as a gift, and it's okay to veer from the plan in support of something that feels more aligned to who you are as an individual. If you don't see the path you like, make it. So, I'm a firm believer that, we blaze new trails. And that is, I think as women, honestly, we think we're very good at this. And I think but it's also something that, can be really growthful and rewarding to be able to have the tenacity to kind of say, okay, that doesn't really work for me. So not trying to fit a square peg into a round hole, it's defining what that path can look like. That is possible. I already talked about being tenacious and fearless. Failure presents an opportunity to grow and learn, find your passion and celebrate successes. And then the last one that's up there is a personal motto of mine, which is never arrive. And this is a theme that I actually heard really enforced in a variety of different ways today. I was at a seminar several years ago, and the superintendent of the York School District has written a book about operations and a variety of different aspects around administration of school districts. And this was his motto, and I stole that fiercely because it really resonates with me, this idea that our book is never finished. We are a work in progress, and that you can have goals, but then you kind of get to that point and you're like, okay, what's next? To me, it is that idea of never truly arriving. It's really kind of a continual process and journey. So that is what I have for you. I am super open to any questions or just general discussion. There were several folks who did not hear this at the beginning, but the books that are up here, really it is just more something that if you're a reader, you're looking for a new title, you're looking for an author that might inspire, this is just kind of a cross-section of books that I have in my personal collection that you're welcome to take a look at. I will say that I'm looking at my friend Katie in the back. Katie's a creator of words, and she's fabulous at it. I am a collector of words, so I really love words. I love the way words come together. I believe in the power of words, and these are great writers that are thought leaders in a variety of different topics. In most cases, I will be honest, I have not read these full books. They are usually people that I've heard on podcasts, usually interviewed, or I follow them on other forms of social media, and they inspire me. And so, people like to surround themselves with friends, which I have friends too, but I surround myself with books. So, any questions or anything that we talked about today that you guys want to discuss in more detail? I do know that I'm separating you between a drink and going home, so I will not belabor it. But if anybody wants to chat, I'd be more than happy to. So that's it.